In November 2014, an email leaked from Sony Pictures written by a senior movie producer. The subject? Who should replace Adam Sandler? The same movie studio that had paid Sandler $20 million a film over a decade was actively planning life without him. Critics had been calling his films among the worst in Hollywood for 25 years. Sandler's last theatrical release had taken in just $46 million domestically. The mid-budget comedy that had built his career was structurally collapsing. The studio that owned his back catalog was telling itself that the future did not include him. 11 years later, Forbes named Adam Sandler the highest paid actor in Hollywood for the second time in 3 years. So how did Sandler do it? To understand, you have to go back to the night that almost ended him the first time, 20 years before the leak. The firing. In January 1995, NBC executive Don Ohlheimer called Lorne Michaels into his office. Ohlheimer wanted Sandler and Chris Farley off Saturday Night Live. The reviews were brutal. The weekly budget had ballooned to $1.5 million. NBC was threatening to fire Michaels himself if the show did not turn things around. Michaels pushed back, but to NBC, it didn't matter. Sandler was out. Sandler told Howard Stern years later, "At the time, I was hurt because I didn't know what else I was going to do." This was not a mild career setback. Sandler was 28 years old and had been fired from the only job in comedy where he had any stability and had no plan B. The pattern in 1995 was that comedians fired from SNL went back to clubs and never came back. Luckily, Sandler had a movie filmed earlier that year in preparation for release. Universal Pictures released his first leading role film titled Billy Madison 3 weeks after the firing. Billy Madison went on to make $26 million on a $10 million budget. Critics called it idiotic and childish, but audiences did not care. They loved it. Universal Pictures then quickly greenlit Happy Gilmore to release just the next year. The film earned $41 million on a $12 million budget. Sandler earned $2 million for his role. But Sandler still had a problem. He was still a $2 million per picture comedian with no direct project ownership, and studios were quietly betting that his hot streak had limits that would eventually end. Because of this, Sandler had to prove the audience demand for his work was real. In 1998, The Wedding Singer brought in $123 million on an $18 million budget. That same year, Waterboy grossed $186 million on a $23 million budget. By 1999, Sandler was no longer a question mark for movie studios. He was an A-list actor who could reliably generate $100 million or more at the box office. And most actors stop here. They take any role, they cash the big checks from the studio, and then they wait for the next picture. Sandler made a very different decision: the founder move. In 1999, Sony co-chairman Amy Pascal was aggressively pursuing Sandler after the release of The Wedding Singer. Pascal believed that Sandler was one of the very few actors who could actually carry a Sony comedy slate by himself. She offered him a first-look production arrangement on the Sony lot. Sandler took the deal, moved into the Judy Garland building on the Sony lot in Culver City, and founded Happy Madison Productions. The name combined his previous films, Happy Gilmore and Billy Madison. The deal structure combined every form of compensation a single film could generate. This single move is what built the $440 million movie empire, and almost no one paid attention at the time. The press treated Happy Madison as a vanity project. What Sandler had actually done was eliminate the need for an outside movie studio. And to understand why this matters, you have to look at how the money worked on a Sony comedy in the year 2000. Mechanism 1, the comp stack. Most A-list actors only capture money from 2 layers on a film. They take a fee for their role, and they might take back-end participation if the film does well at the box office. The producer fee, the writer fee, the executive producer fee all go to the outside production companies. Sandler became his own outside production company. Sony reportedly paid Sandler handsomely for this arrangement. Here's the math on Sandler's fee on a Sony comedy with a $50 million budget that grossed $200 million worldwide. $25 million actor fee, $5 million producer fee through Happy Madison, $5 million writer fee where applicable, and back-end gross participation in the range of $15 to $30 million. Total paycheck, $50 to $65 million per film. But the comp stack only worked if the films kept getting made cheaply. Mechanism 2, the captive ensemble. If you've ever watched a Happy Madison movie since 1999, you already know the cast. Rob Schneider, David Spade, Kevin James, Alan Covert, the same ensemble ensemble across 30 years. Most of the time, when an actor casts the same friends and everything, the press calls it favoritism and moves on. But in reality, it's a moat. Repeat ensemble members negotiate against their long-running Happy Madison relationship rather than against external market competition. That suppresses casting costs. The ensemble produces a recognizable brand signature. Audiences identify a Happy Madison film by who is in it before they read a review or see a trailer. When Adam Sandler made Grown Ups in 2010, he gave each of his 4 co-stars, Schneider, Spade, James, and Chris Rock, a $200,000 Maserati as a signing bonus. The aggregate of the gifts came to just under $1 million. Less than $1 million in cars, over $500 million in box office. For 15 years, the model ran without a real challenger until the bubble quickly burst. If you want to see how other operators use this exact same distribution to build 9-figure empires, hit subscribe. This channel is where we stop looking at celebrities as entertainment and start analyzing the money systems behind them. The collapse, 2012 to 2014. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It happened in a 24-month stretch where everything that had once worked stopped working. Jack and Jill came out in late 2011. Critics crushed it. The film swept the Razzies and became the cultural shorthand for studio comedy hitting rock bottom. Then That's My Boy in 2012, $70 million budget, $58 million worldwide. The first outright theatrical loss of Sandler's mature career. Then Blended in 2014, $46 million domestic, a paltry number for a Sandler picture. 3 consecutive films in a 30-month window where the Happy Madison machine produced output the audience just refused to defend. Then, in early 2014, Sandler walked into a meeting at Sony with a film idea, the board game. Sandler pitched a Candyland feature. He wanted Sony to greenlight it on the spot. The reported budget request, $200 million. According to internal emails that became public later that year, Sandler cornered the studio executives in a room and demanded a yes before he left. The executives in that room said no. What they said about Sandler privately afterward was significantly worse. In November 2014, North Korean-linked hackers dumped Sony's entire internal email archive onto the public internet. Sandler found out what the studio actually thought of him the same way the rest of the world did, by reading it. The emails described Sandler in derogatory terms. They documented Pascal's frustrations over Hotel Transylvania 2 producer fees. They also documented the Candyland argument in real time. The studio that had paid Sandler $20 million a picture for 15 years was actively planning his replacement. The woman who had originally signed him in '99 was reading the obituary written by her own colleagues, and the public now knew it. Sandler's final contracted Sony film, Pixels, came out in 2015. The film lost the studio approximately $88 million. The Daily Beast headline that December read, "Sony hates Adam Sandler as much as you." The press said this was the end of the Sandler golden era, but they had the story entirely wrong. Sandler had already booked his next major movie studio meeting on the books. The Netflix bet. In October of 2014, Variety broke the news that Sandler had signed an exclusive deal with Netflix. 4 films, reported deal value approximately $250 million. The industry read it as a downshift, a downward trending comedy star taking what he could get from a streamer that had yet to make any successful original movies. This, of course, turned out to be dead wrong. Sandler and his representation had correctly identified a gap in the streaming market. Netflix's monetization metric was revenue retention. How many subscribers signed up to watch a new film and how many stayed subscribed to the platform because of it. The films Sony was discounting because of softening opening weekends were exactly the films Netflix was overvaluing because of high sign-up rates. Same content, different metric, wildly different valuation. But the bet still had to prove itself, and the first film almost killed it. The second crisis, Ridiculous 6. The first Netflix Sandler film came out in December of 2015. It was called The Ridiculous 6. Native American actors walked off set during the production over what they described as offensive depictions in the script. The walkout made national news. Critics savaged the finished film. Reviews called it the worst movie Sandler had made in a career filled with films critics already hated. For roughly 18 months after the deal signed, the trade narrative was that Sandler had taken Netflix's money and produced exactly the kind of film Sony had been right to walk away from. The bet looked broken. Then Netflix released the engagement data. Netflix said Ridiculous 6 had been the most watched film on the service in its first 30 days of availability. The critics who had savaged it were not the people watching it. The audience Sandler had been quietly building since Billy Madison were still there. Netflix then doubled down and went on to release The Do-Over in 2016, Sandy Wexler in 2017, The Week Of in 2018, and then Murder Mystery in 2019. Netflix reported over 83 million households watched Murder Mystery in its first 4 weeks of release. And at that point, the question stopped being whether Sandler's streaming bet had worked. The question was, how big could it get? In January 2020, Netflix announced a new 4-movie deal with Happy Madison Productions, reported to be $275 million. Netflix's chief content officer, Ted Sarandos, said this when announcing the deal. Whether you know him as Sandman, The Waterboy, Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, Nick Spitz, or simply Adam, one thing is clear: our members can't get enough of him. Across the entire Sandler library, his films have generated more than 61 billion viewing minutes on Netflix since 2018. The cumulative deal value to Sandler and Happy Madison reportedly totaled between $400 and $500 million. Happy Gilmore 2 dropped on Netflix on July 25, 2025, almost 30 years after the original. In 3 days, the film generated 46.7 million views. This was the largest US opening weekend of all time for a Netflix film, the biggest opening of Sandler's career. In a single week, Happy Gilmore 2 amassed 2.89 billion minutes of viewing time in the United States. Forbes had already named Sandler the highest paid actor of 2023 at $73 million. In March 2026, Forbes named him the highest paid actor of 2025 as well, at $48 million from films. The man Sony was planning to replace finished first on the Forbes list twice in 3 years. When Sandler hosted SNL for the first time in 2019, he ended his monologue with a song. The closing line went, "I was fired. NBC said that I was done. Then I made over $4 billion at the box office, so I guess you could say I won." 3 structural decisions explain the outcome. The first decision was founding Happy Madison in 1999 instead of just collecting paychecks. Most A-list actors get paid for showing up. The producer fee, the writer fee, the executive producer fee. All of those go to outside companies. Sandler made his own outside company. So instead of paying those fees out, he paid them to himself. Jim Carrey worked just as much as Sandler. So did Eddie Murphy. Both made roughly $200 million across their careers. Sandler made more than $440 million. The difference is that Sandler owned the business his work flowed through. If your name carries the project, owning the company that produces the project is the single biggest leverage move you can make. The second decision was the friend group. Schneider, Spade, James, Covert, Herlihy, the same 5 guys across 30 years. When you cast the same actors over and over, 3 things happen. They charge less because they need the next Happy Madison job, the audience knows what they're getting before they need to read a review, and nobody else can copy the chemistry because the chemistry took 30 years to build. $200,000 Maseratis that Sandler had given his co-stars on Grown Ups cost less than $1 million total. That franchise made over $500 million. A locked-in team is cheaper than free agents and harder to compete with. The third decision was the Netflix deal in 2014. Sandler saw something the rest of Hollywood missed. The box office measured opening weekends. Netflix measured whether people finished the movie. Sandler's audience always finished the movie. Critics never reflected that. So the same films Sony was discounting were the films Netflix was overpaying for. Same content, 2 different metrics, wildly different prices. 11 years later, Sandler is the highest paid actor in Hollywood. This has been the Adam Sandler Portfolio Breakdown. My name is Buster, and I'll see you next time.